And these terms this relationship you can see over here on page 120. Symbols, really the word should be signs. Signs, and as we discussed last time, 3 different types that are primary. There's other kinds of signs, but the 3 primary types are symbols, or icons, indexes, and symbols. So the corresponding level for the semiotic is the form, we should say signs, not just symbols, okay? The cognitive is concepts, and the corporeal is image schemata, and these levels and forms are operating all the time in our communication, right? Yeah.
What page is this on?
This is page 120. And then there is this hierarchy. The corporeal is the most concrete, right? It's the body in the world. It's our interactions with others in the world at the gestural and tonal levels. That's the most concrete form of communication. Okay? The image schemas that are developed from that gestural and tonal dimension of our lived world form our concepts, all right? They inform our conceptual development. You see this with children, with babies, as they grow up, they begin to make associations and begin to think based upon their bodily interaction with the world, right? So they get a concept of the mother formed through their bodily interaction with the mother. Okay? And then one day you hear mama. That's semiotic. It's the most, rudimentary, fundamental, primordial form of this development. But it's also much more sophisticated. Okay? So in some sense, what's the implications of this? It means that when we study another culture or another language, but we're not in that language or in that culture, we're not there present to it bodily, then we have to work only at the semiotic level and the conceptual or the cognitive level. Then what we find is when you go to that place that speaks that language and has that cultural history, that things are different than what you've learned. Okay? Because your immersion bodily in that world changes. We'll get there. Yeah, this one. Yeah. Okay, we'll just leave it here. And you have to readjust a little bit. Right? You become fluent in the language only once you are fully immersed in the culture. Okay? So, as I talked about last time, commensurability, the idea of commensurability is that we can find ways of linking up with other languages and cultures through our immersion in it. Right? It's not just a play of words and concepts. It's also being able to relate to the experience of it. Okay? It's possible that you've had an experience, but you don't have a language for it. That's very possible. You have an experience, but you don't have a language for it, and being immersed in that other culture suddenly gives you a language for it. All right? So if in Japan, for example, Japan has 3 syllabary systems. Kanji, which is the use of Chinese characters, then hiragana, which changes the Chinese characters into Japanese conjugations, Japanese grammar, okay? So every kanji has an associated hiragana, which are phonemes, okay, morphemes. And then they have katakana. Katakana is a syllable system that was created in order to bring in Western words, basically, or foreign words, mostly American or European words, mostly English. Okay? So they have a syllable system to use words that changes American words into the Japanese phonemic system. Does that make sense? So, for example, what do you think rear view mirror is in katakana? Bakumiru. Somebody says, oh, the bakumiru. You say, what's that? It's a rear view mirror. Elevator. It's elevator. And so on. So some menus in the cafes are all in katakana because all of the items on the list in the cafes are from, overseas, from there or elsewhere. Okay, so it's, you can adjust language to fit the concepts based upon your experience. So one of the issues that this chapter wants to address is the idea that this is really a long word. Look at this. This is a $20 word or what, huh? Incommensurability. One of the arguments here in this chapter, fundamental argument, is that incommensurability between languages should not exist. That all languages are by definition translatable. We can find, in other words, we can find concepts in a target language, through a target language, that can help us understand the experiences that are described in a host language. Right? But where does incommensurability function? Incommensurability means that there's no possibility for translation. No possibility for translation. You cannot translate from one domain to another. Can you think of any examples of that? Not being able to translate from one domain to another? One way we think about this is as genres, a genre. What's a genre? French, it's genre. In English, it's genre. Think of different genres. Poetry, prose, drama. These are different forms of creative expression, right? Poetry is not prose. It's not a play. They're different genres. We can think of this in a larger context too. Law is a genre, right? Legal terms, and knowing how to use those legal terms it's not the same as religion, right? It's not the same as economics. These are different genres of discourse. You can't translate one genre into another. You can find linkages, okay? There can be some linkages. You may feel that there's some, certainly economic import to the legal, to laws regarding finance. So you bring economics into the legal construct. But law itself is different than economy, right? You can't translate those into each other. So that's an example of incommensurability. You can't have the same experience as another person in some instances. Can you give me an example of that? Where one person's experience, another person can never have that experience. What's an obvious example? What?
Skateboard?
I'm talking about, okay, you're right. So if you are one race, you can't have the experience of someone from another race in a particular culture, in a particular nation, right? You can't translate those two experiences. It's impossible. You can empathize, you can imagine, You can think about it, but you can never have that experience. Although a guy in the 1950s wrote a book. You ever hear this book, Black Like Me?
Yeah, that's a great one.
You know, where he dyed his skin black and went to Mississippi. Then he had the experience. You know?
How do you dye your skin?
Well, he did it. Hey, what about having babies? Being pregnant and having a baby. What do you think, guys? Can you imagine it?
Nope.
Childbirth is incommensurable. Men cannot have that experience. You know, I like when the fathers, new fathers come out and say, yeah, we just had a baby. It's like, oh shit, man. You didn't go through that. You didn't do that. You didn't go into labor, or you didn't get cut open, or you didn't have to go through. No, so you didn't go through the pregnancy. Oh yeah, we're pregnant. Right, you're pregnant. No, you can't have it. Those experiences are incommensurable. So there are certainly certain traditions and cultures, and I mentioned this last time, that no other culture participates in or knows what it would be like to live through that kind of ritual or that kind of practice and so on. Okay, so this is the idea of incommensurability, and the principle of commensurability in this chapter is to argue that yeah, there's going to be some experiences that we can't share, but we can find ways to link up and overlap and explain and try to empathize and understand, even if those differences are very extreme. Okay? So we're on a continuum here, and we're working towards linkages of various kinds. And that's really the key to intercultural adaptation and understanding. Okay, so we'll leave it at that for today, and I'll see you next Tuesday.